Your ad is getting clicks, leads are coming in, cost per lead looks completely fine, but those leads aren't turning into paying customers. Does that mean that your ads aren't working? Well, not necessarily. Advertisers keep trying to fix commercial problems with campaign settings. They change the targeting, adjust the budget, restructure the campaign, or switch up the bidding strategy. But the campaign might not be the problem, because a good ad can win the click, generate the lead, and still fail to produce a customer. And if you only look at the first half of that journey, you can easily end up fixing the wrong thing. Inside Meta ads and Google ads, your campaigns might look really healthy. You've got a reasonable click-through rate, people are reaching your website, conversions are being recorded, and the cost per lead is within the target that you set. From the platform's perspective, the campaign is working just fine. Really well, actually, because it was asked to generate leads, and that's exactly what it did. But the business doesn't make money from just leads. It makes money when the right leads become actual customers. It sounds really obvious, but it constantly gets missed, because the easiest numbers to see are sitting inside of Ads Manager. You can immediately see clicks, conversions, cost per lead inside the platform. But the numbers that tell you whether the advertising is commercially useful, whether it's producing real money for the business, usually sits somewhere else. Which leads were qualified, how many were actually booked, how many answered the phone, how many received a quote, how many actually bought, and what did it cost to acquire an actual customer. So when an apparently good ad fails to produce sales, there are several areas that I would inspect first before I start rebuilding the campaign or tweaking any settings. The first problem is that a really strong ad can attract a lot of attention from people who are never going to buy in the first place. This happens when the hook is broad, dramatic, or curiosity driven, but the offer requires a much higher level of intent. You see this all the time when brands chase TikTok trends. The video gets views, shares, comments, likes, and everyone is celebrating the engagement. The people who are interacting with it were never people who were going to buy from you. They were just here for the entertainment. Virality and buyer intent aren't the same thing. You can end up with a really strong click-through rate, cheap traffic, and plenty of inquiries, but you're receiving really few qualified inquiries. The platform sees people responding and assumes that it's reached the right people. But then the business starts receiving inquiries from people who misunderstood the offer, or can't afford it, or they live outside the service area, or they were just never serious about buying because they were here for the entertainment. That's not always a targeting problem, it's usually a messaging problem. The ad might be doing an excellent job at attracting the wrong type of response. This is why I would never judge creative on just the click-through rate alone. I want to know what happened after the click. Which ad produced qualified inquiries, which one generated booked appointments, and which one eventually contributed to revenue. The cheapest lead isn't automatically the best lead. We see this all the time, people screenshotting their Ads Manager dashboard with hundreds of leads at $2 per lead, but we're not actually seeing whether or not those leads became paying customers. Oftentimes, the leads are cheap because the barrier to become a lead is far too low. The second place I'd look at is the offer. You can have strong targeting, good campaign structure, an ad that looks really professional, but if the outcome for the customer is unclear, the value feels really weak, or the offer looks interchangeable with every other competitor, the campaign is going to struggle. A weak offer often gets misdiagnosed with an advertising or a campaign setting problem. So the advertiser jumps in and changes the audience targeting, they change the creative, they change the bid strategy, while the market is still being shown a really weak proposition. There's a really big difference between saying contact us for more information and giving someone a clear reason to act now. For example, book in a free assessment and get a clear plan for fixing XYZ problem. The second version tells people what they're going to receive and what's going to happen next. The offer doesn't always need to be a discount or some complicated incentive. It needs a clear outcome and just a sensible, easy to understand next step. Before changing anything in the account or in the campaign settings, I'd ask whether the outcome is obvious, whether it feels valuable, whether it's believable, and whether there is a clear reason to act now instead of in another 6 months' time. If the answer is no, then the campaign might not be the part that needs fixing. It might just be your offer. The third problem happens after the click, when the ad successfully created interest, but the landing page makes the visitor work to understand what they've actually clicked on. On the landing page, the message changes, the offer becomes vague, the proof just disappears, the page loads really slowly, the mobile experience is difficult to use, or your form on the page asks for way too much information than the visitor is prepared to give. The person might also be unsure about what happens after they submit a form, whether they're booking something, requesting a quote, or just asking for more information. At that point, the campaign is successfully creating the demand, but the website is failing to convert it. And a common response here is to just buy more traffic because none of the visitors are converting. But more traffic coming through to a really weak page doesn't solve the problem. It simply just sends more people into the same poor experience. So the first thing I check here is message match. Does the landing page continue the same promise as the ad? Or does the ad talk about one specific outcome and then send people to a generic homepage? Then I would look at trust. Can the visitor quickly understand who the business is helping, what the service involves, whether there is evidence that it works, what the next step is, and what happens after they inquire? And finally, I just look for friction. How long is the form? Does it work properly on mobile? Is the call to action clear? Is the page trying to make the visitor take 5 different actions all at once? This is where a really good ad can fail, even though it successfully created that initial interest. The fourth area is something that we've touched on very briefly, but it's what happens after the lead comes in. And this part is usually invisible inside of the advertising platform. Meta Ads and Google Ads records the conversion and considers the job done. But then the lead isn't contacted until the next afternoon. The first phone call is missed and nobody follows it up. The sales team makes one attempt and closes the lead as unresponsive. The lead could be dropping their kids at school, running errands, or maybe they're just in a meeting at work. The inquiry might receive a generic email with no clear next step, or the person answering the phone might not be equipped to qualify the lead and move them forward. The campaign could be producing viable opportunities, while the business is just failing to convert them. But from the outside, everyone's still blaming the advertising. That's why it's so important that lead generation campaigns need proper feedback directly from the business, preferably directly from the sales team. Knowing that the campaign generated 40 leads, 20 more than last month, isn't enough, and isn't a good enough indicator that the campaign is performing successfully. I want to know how many were qualified, how many were contacted, how soon were they contacted, how many booked, how many showed up, how many received a quote, how many became customers, and what actual revenue they produced. Because there's no way to evaluate the success of a campaign without understanding how much money it made the business. Without that information, the advertiser can only optimize towards a form submission or a phone call, rather than the downstream quality of the actual customer. When the campaign performance looks like it's going downhill, I like to start with the commercial result and then work backwards, instead of opening Ads Manager and immediately changing settings. Firstly, are enough qualified leads becoming customers? If the leads are suitable, but very few of them close, I'd inspect the follow-up and the sales process. Next, are the leads genuinely qualified? If there are plenty of inquiries, but most are unsuitable, I'd inspect the message, the offer, and the expectations that are being created by the ad. Then, are enough visitors becoming leads? If the clicks look really healthy, but the landing page conversion rate is really poor, the website or the offer is probably creating friction and contributing to that low conversion rate. Finally, are the right people clicking at all? If engagement is weak right from the beginning, then yes, the ad, the audience, the campaign settings might genuinely be the issue. The goal is to narrow the scope of the problem first, then focus on the elements within that stage. If the issue is landing page conversion, focus on the page rather than rebuilding the campaign. If the issue is closing qualified leads, focus on your follow-up, your sales, and what happens after the inquiry. Don't troubleshoot the entire customer journey at once. You're just going to waste your time. Identify the stage where the performance starts to deteriorate, then investigate the variables within that stage. Imagine a campaign spends $3,000. It generates 30 leads, giving it a cost per lead of $100. If the cost per lead target was $120, the advertiser might reasonably call that campaign a success. But when we look further down the funnel, only 10 of those leads were actually qualified. 5 booked an appointment, 3 showed up, and 1 became a customer. The true customer acquisition cost isn't $100, it's $3,000. Now we have a much more useful question, which is where the result actually started to break down. If most of the leads were unsuitable, the issue may be the offer, the message, or the qualification process. If the qualified leads didn't book, the follow-up process might be really weak. If booked leads didn't show up, the confirmation and the nurture process might need a bit more work. If the meetings happened, but nobody bought from you, the issue might sit in the sales process, the pricing, or the service delivery itself. Changing the campaign targeting without understanding any of that would be completely arbitrary. Turns out just updating and changing things randomly won't work. Sometimes though, the ad is actually the problem. Obviously bad creatives exist, poor targeting exists, tracking can be broken, and campaigns can absolutely be structured really badly. This definitely isn't an excuse to ignore optimizations within the actual account. The point is the ad isn't automatically responsible for the entire customer journey. Small datasets can also make the diagnosis really difficult because one customer can completely change the numbers when the budget is low. And long sales cycles mean the campaign may generate value that doesn't actually appear for several weeks or months. And if the tracking is incomplete, every conclusion becomes less reliable. You need enough data, clean tracking, and honest feedback from the business before making any major decision. So a good ad can obviously get attention, generate clicks, and produce leads at a really efficient cost, while the wider system still fails to create a paying customer. So before you rebuild the campaign and tweak the settings, follow the result all the way through to the end of the customer journey. Make sure you look at the quality of the leads, the landing page experience, the follow-up process, and the final sales result, then narrow down the part of the journey where performance starts to break down. Advertisers keep trying to fix commercial problems with campaign settings, but sometimes the most useful thing that you can do inside of your ads platform is to stop looking inside of the ads platform. That's all I've got for you today. If you found this video helpful, please let me know in the form of a like or a comment.